Imagine waking up tomorrow and every social media platform on Earth has vanished. No endless scrolling, no notifications, no carefully curated versions of other people's lives, just silence. Welcome to What If Horizons, where we explore the impossible to understand the inevitable. Today's question: what if social media was banned worldwide? Let's start with the obvious: chaos. Within minutes of the ban, millions of people would stare at their phones like confused pigeons, unsure what to do with their thumbs. The withdrawal symptoms would be immediate. No more pretending to care about distant acquaintances, vacation photos. No more arguing with strangers about topics you barely understand. Just you, your thoughts, and the horrifying realization that you now have to entertain yourself. Governments would claim it's for the greater good: mental health, privacy, national security, take your pick. But let's be honest, they just got tired of citizens fact-checking them in real time. Politicians would finally breathe easy, knowing their old tweets can't resurface. Meanwhile, influencers would panic. An entire industry built on selling detox tea and fabricated lifestyles would collapse overnight. Some would attempt to pivot to traditional careers, only to realize professional Instagrammer doesn't translate well on a resume. The first 24 hours would be the most revealing. Without the constant dopamine hits of likes and shares, people might actually look up from their screens. Eye contact would make an awkward comeback. Conversations would require full sentences instead of reaction emojis. The shock would ripple through every aspect of life: dating, friendships, even how we consume news. Imagine hearing about world events from actual journalists instead of random algorithms. But here's the twist: not everyone would suffer. Artists might rediscover the joy of creating without an audience. Kids could play outside without documenting every scraped knee. And think of all the productivity gains when workplaces aren't constantly interrupted by viral distractions. Of course, there's a dark side. Without social media, how would we know which foods are suddenly problematic or which celebrities are feuding this week? How would we perform outrage if we can't share our hot takes instantly? Society would need new ways to manufacture drama, perhaps through interpretive dance or aggressively passive-aggressive postcards. The ban would expose just how deeply these platforms rewired our brains. We've outsourced memory to photo archives, validation to follower counts, and critical thinking to trending hashtags. Stripping it all away would be like removing the training wheels from a bike we've forgotten how to ride. So what happens next? Do we adapt or collapse into a collective existential crisis? Stay tuned as we dive deeper into a world where the share button no longer exists, and what that means for humanity's sanity. Now let's talk about the economic fallout. Social media isn't just a pastime, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. When it disappears, the ripple effects would be felt across the globe. Companies that relied on Facebook ads to sell their products would scramble to find new ways to reach customers. Billboards, once considered relics of the past, would make a triumphant return. Suddenly, every street corner would be plastered with ads for things you didn't know you needed until you saw them in giant, neon letters. Small businesses, especially those that thrived on Instagram or Etsy, would face an uphill battle. Without the ability to showcase their products to millions of potential buyers, many would struggle to stay afloat. The handmade soap industry, in particular, would take a massive hit. Who knew the world needed so many varieties of lavender-scented bars? Meanwhile, tech giants like Meta and Twitter would be forced to pivot, or perish. Mark Zuckerberg might finally have to fulfill his dream of building a metaverse, though without Facebook to fund it, it's unclear how he'd convince anyone to join. Elon Musk, ever the opportunist, would probably launch a new platform called TruthNet, where users could post exactly one tweet per day. Spoiler: it would still be mostly memes. The stock market would go haywire. Shares of social media companies would plummet, dragging down the entire tech sector. Investors would panic, frantically searching for the next big thing. Cryptocurrency, already a volatile mess, would see wild swings as people tried to figure out where to park their money. NFTs, already on shaky ground, would become completely irrelevant. The last known sale of a Bored Ape JPEG would be for $1, and even that would feel like a rip-off. But it's not all doom and gloom. Some industries would thrive in this new world. Print media, long declared dead, would experience a renaissance. Newspapers and magazines would suddenly find themselves in high demand as people sought reliable sources of information. Publishers would dust off their printing presses and start churning out physical copies like it's 1999. Entertainment would also see a shift. Without TikTok to launch viral songs, musicians would have to rely on actual talent and word of mouth. Concerts would become more intimate, with artists performing for smaller, more dedicated audiences. Reality TV, which had been losing viewers to YouTube and Instagram, would make a comeback. Imagine a world where the Kardashians are back on your TV screen every week. Terrifying, isn't it? And then there's the gig economy. Influencers, no longer able to monetize their followers, would have to find real jobs. Some might become photographers or writers, while others would retreat to their parents' basements to plot their next move. The phrase, content creator, would disappear from LinkedIn profiles, replaced by more traditional titles like marketing specialist or unemployed. So while the economic impact of a social media ban would be significant, it wouldn't be entirely negative. Some industries would adapt, others would thrive, and a few would vanish into obscurity. The real question is, would we miss it? Or would we find new ways to connect, create, and consume that don't involve endless scrolling? Stay tuned as we explore the cultural shifts that would follow this global upheaval. Let's dive into the cultural chaos that would ensue. Without social media, the way we share and consume culture would undergo a seismic shift. Memes, once the universal language of the internet, would become a relic of the past. People would have to resort to telling jokes the old-fashioned way, through awkward anecdotes and poorly timed puns. Comedy clubs would see a surge in attendance as desperate meme enthusiasts sought their fix. Trends would no longer spread like wildfire. Remember the ice bucket challenge, or the endless parade of dance crazes. Without platforms to amplify them, these fads would fizzle out before they even began. Fashion trends, once dictated by Instagram influencers, would revert to being influenced by actual designers. The era of oversized sunglasses and chunky sneakers might finally come to an end. Art and creativity would face a similar reckoning. Without the instant validation of likes and shares, artists would have to rely on genuine passion and skill. Galleries and exhibitions would become the primary way to showcase work, forcing creators to engage with their audience in person. Imagine having to explain your abstract painting to someone face to face instead of hiding behind a cryptic caption. Music would also change. Viral hits, which often owe their success to TikTok, would become a thing of the past. Musicians would have to tour relentlessly to build a fanbase, returning to the roots of rock and roll. The phrase, one-hit wonder, might make a comeback, as artists struggle to replicate their success without the help of algorithms. Literature would see a revival. With fewer distractions, people might actually find the time to read books again. Authors, no longer pressured to maintain a social media presence, could focus on writing. Bookstores, once on the brink of extinction, would become cultural hubs once more. The smell of freshly printed pages would replace the glow of screens. Even language itself would evolve. Abbreviations like LOL and BRB, born out of the need for quick communication, would fall out of favor. Emojis, once a universal shorthand, would become a niche form of expression. People would have to relearn the art of conveying emotion through words alone. Cultural icons would change too. Without the ability to build a following online, celebrities would have to earn their status through talent and hard work. The Kardashians, whose empire was built on social media, would fade into obscurity. In their place, we might see a return of classic Hollywood stars, actors and musicians who let their work speak for itself. But perhaps the most significant change would be in how we perceive ourselves. Without the constant pressure to present a perfect image, people might start to embrace their flaws. The phrase, Instagram versus reality, would lose its meaning, as reality becomes the only option. Self-esteem, long battered by comparison culture, might begin to heal. So while the cultural landscape would look vastly different, it might not be a bad thing. Without the noise of social media, we could rediscover the joy of authentic expression. Stay tuned as we explore how this newfound authenticity would impact our personal relationships. Now let's examine what would happen to our personal relationships. Without social media, maintaining connections would suddenly require actual effort. Forget about passive-aggressive likes or vague booking. You'd have to pick up the phone if you wanted to start drama. And what a terrifying concept that is. Families would be the first to feel the shift. No more stalking your cousin's vacation photos to fuel your jealousy. Instead, you'd have to call them and listen to them describe their trip in excruciating detail. Holiday gatherings would become more intense without the buffer of everyone staring at their screens. Awkward political debates would reach new heights when Uncle Ron can't escape to Twitter mid-conversation. Romantic relationships would undergo a fascinating transformation. Dating apps, gone. Courtship would revert to meeting people through friends, chance encounters, or, God forbid, making eye contact in public places. Ghosting would become much harder when you can't just disappear behind a screen. Breakups would require actual closure conversations instead of just unfollowing each other and posting cryptic song lyrics. Long-distance relationships would face unique challenges. No more pretending you're fine with just video calls when you really want to check their location on Snapchat. Couples would have to rely on trust and communication rather than digital surveillance. Love letters might make a comeback, though let's be honest, most people's handwriting has deteriorated to the point of illegibility after years of typing. Friendships would be tested in unexpected ways. That group chat you've been ignoring for months. Now you'll have to explain your absence in person. The friend who always posts inspirational quotes but never checks in. Turns out they're just as flaky without social media propping up their image. You'd quickly learn who genuinely cares about maintaining connections versus who just enjoyed performing friendship online. Workplace dynamics would shift dramatically. Professional networking would require actual networking, conferences, emails, perhaps even face-to-face meetings. Employees could no longer slack off while pretending to be busy on LinkedIn. The concept of personal brand would vanish, leaving people to be judged purely on their skills rather than their ability to craft the perfect humblebrag post. But here's the surprising upside. Without social media's illusion of connection, we might develop deeper relationships. No more mistaking likes for genuine care or followers for real friends. Conversations would have to be meaningful rather than performative. We'd rediscover the satisfaction of truly knowing people rather than just knowing their highlight reels. Of course, this transition wouldn't be smooth. Social anxiety would spike as people relearned how to interact without digital buffers. Dinner parties would be plagued by awkward silences until people remembered how to make small talk. But eventually, we might realize that connection was never about platforms, it was always about presence. Stay tuned as we explore how this seismic shift would affect something equally fundamental, our mental health. Let's talk about mental health, because let's face it, social media has been both a blessing and a curse for our collective psyche. Without it, the world would be a very different place, and not just because we'd have fewer opportunities to compare our lives to someone else's perfectly curated vacation photos. First, the good news: anxiety levels would likely plummet. No more waking up to a barrage of notifications, no more feeling pressured to respond to messages instantly, and no more doom-scrolling through endless feeds of bad news. The constant noise of social media would be replaced by something unfamiliar: silence. And while that might feel uncomfortable at first, it could also be incredibly freeing. Depression rates might also drop. Without the endless comparisons to other people's highlight reels, we'd stop measuring our worth by likes, shares, and followers. The pressure to present a perfect life would vanish, allowing people to embrace their imperfections without fear of judgment. Imagine a world where you could post a selfie without worrying about the angle, the lighting, or the number of double taps. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. For some, social media has been a lifeline, a way to connect with others, share struggles, and find support. Without it, people might feel isolated, especially those who rely on online communities for connection. Mental health advocates would have to find new ways to reach those in need, whether through local groups, hotlines, or good old-fashioned word of mouth. Therapy might become more popular. With fewer distractions, people would have more time to reflect on their mental health and seek professional help. Therapists would see a surge in clients as people grapple with the sudden absence of their digital crutches. And let's be honest, many of us could use a session or two to unpack why we ever thought posting our breakfast was a good idea. Self-esteem would get a much-needed boost. Without the constant pressure to look perfect, people might start to feel more comfortable in their own skin. The beauty industry, which thrives on selling insecurities, would have to adapt. Ads for skincare products might focus on actual benefits rather than promising to make you look like a filtered version of yourself. But here's the kicker. Boredom would make a comeback. Without the endless scroll of social media, people would have to find new ways to fill their time. Some might turn to hobbies, others to books, and a few might even venture outside. The phrase, "I'm bored," would become a rallying cry for creativity, pushing people to explore new interests and rediscover old passions. Of course, not everyone would handle the transition well. Some might struggle to fill the void left by social media, turning to other forms of escapism. Video games, streaming services, and other digital distractions would likely see a spike in usage. But even these alternatives would be a step up from the constant barrage of social media noise. So while the mental health impact of a social media ban would be complex, it could ultimately lead to a healthier, more balanced society. People would have more time to focus on themselves, their relationships, and their well-being. And isn't that what we all really want? Stay tuned as we explore how this newfound mental clarity would affect something equally important, our productivity. Now let's tackle productivity, because let's be honest, social media has been the ultimate procrastination tool for years. Without it, the world would suddenly become a much more efficient place. Or would it? First, the obvious. Workplaces would transform overnight. No more pretending to work while secretly scrolling through memes. Employees would have to actually focus on their tasks, leading to a potential surge in productivity. Meetings might even start on time, as people wouldn't be distracted by checking their notifications under the table. But it's not just about work. Students would face a similar reckoning. Without the constant pull of Instagram or TikTok, studying might actually become a priority. Libraries, once seen as relics of the past, would see a resurgence in popularity. The phrase, "I'll just check my feed for 5 minutes," would be replaced by, "I guess I'll read this chapter now." The gig economy would also see changes. Freelancers who relied on social media to find clients would have to get creative. Networking events, cold emails, and even good old-fashioned word of mouth would become essential tools for finding work. The downside, no more viral posts leading to overnight success. The upside, a more stable and sustainable way of building a career. Creative industries would face unique challenges. Writers, artists, and musicians who used social media to promote their work would need to find new ways to reach audiences. Book tours, gallery openings, and live performances would become more important than ever. The idea of going viral would be replaced by the slow, steady process of building a genuine fanbase. But here's the twist. Without the constant distraction of social media, people might actually find more time for hobbies. That guitar gathering dust in the corner. Time to learn a few chords. That half-finished novel on your laptop. Time to dust it off and get writing. The world might see a renaissance of creativity as people rediscover the joy of doing things just for fun. Of course, not everyone would thrive in this new environment. Some might struggle to fill the void left by social media, turning to other forms of procrastination. Video games, streaming services, and even old-fashioned daydreaming might see a spike in popularity. But even these alternatives would be a step up from the endless scroll of social media. The biggest change, however, would be in how we perceive productivity. Without the constant pressure to document every moment, people might start to value quality over quantity. The idea of being busy would be replaced by the idea of being present. And isn't that what productivity is really about? So while the transition might be rocky at first, the long-term benefits could be enormous. People would have more time to focus on what truly matters, whether that's work, hobbies, or simply enjoying life. And isn't that the ultimate goal? Stay tuned as we explore how this newfound productivity would affect something equally important, our sense of community. Let's talk about community, because without social media, the way we connect with others would fundamentally change. Gone would be the days of joining online groups for every niche interest, from knitting enthusiasts to conspiracy theorists. Instead, we'd have to find new ways to build and maintain communities. Neighborhoods would see a revival. Without the ability to connect digitally, people would have to rely on face-to-face interactions. Block parties, community gardens, and local events would become the norm. The phrase, next-door neighbor, would take on a whole new meaning as people rediscovered the value of proximity. Religious and spiritual groups would also see changes. Without the ability to livestream services, people would have to attend in person. This could lead to stronger bonds within congregations, as members interacted more frequently and meaningfully. The sense of belonging that comes from shared rituals and traditions would be amplified. Political activism would face a unique challenge. Social media has been a powerful tool for organizing protests and spreading awareness. Without it, activists would have to rely on grassroots efforts, flyers, word of mouth, and old-fashioned door knocking. While this might slow down the process, it could also lead to more sustainable and localized movements. Support groups, whether for mental health, addiction, or other issues, would need to adapt. Online forums and social media pages have been lifelines for many, offering a sense of connection and understanding. Without these platforms, people would have to seek out in-person meetings or phone-based support systems. The silver lining: these face-to-face interactions could foster deeper connections and more meaningful support. Schools and universities would also see changes. Students who once connected through social media would have to find new ways to build friendships and networks. Study groups, clubs, and campus events would become more important than ever. The idea of school spirit might make a comeback as students rallied around shared experiences rather than digital interactions. Even workplaces would see a shift. Without the ability to connect on platforms like LinkedIn, professional communities would have to form through conferences, industry events, and local meetups. Networking would become a more personal and intentional process, leading to stronger professional relationships. But here's the thing: while the transition might be challenging, it could also lead to more authentic and resilient communities. Without the superficiality of social media, people would have to invest time and effort into building connections. The result: stronger, more meaningful relationships that stand the test of time. So while the loss of social media might feel like a blow to our sense of community, it could also be an opportunity to rediscover the value of real, human connection. Stay tuned as we explore how this shift would affect something equally important: our sense of identity. Now let's tackle identity, that carefully constructed persona we've all been maintaining online. Without social media, who would we even be? The answer might surprise you. First, the performative aspect of modern life would vanish overnight. No more staging photos to prove you're having fun. No more humble bragging about your accomplishments. That carefully curated version of yourself you've been polishing for years. Gone. You'd just be you. And that might be terrifying at first. Personal branding would become a relic of the past. The pressure to maintain a consistent online persona would disappear, allowing people to embrace their contradictions. You could enjoy both highbrow literature and trashy reality TV without worrying about what it says about your brand. The liberation of not performing for an audience would be palpable. Memory would function differently. Without digital archives of every meal and sunset, we'd have to rely on actual recollection. Your brain might start working like it did in the old days, remembering important moments because they mattered, not because they got likes. Vacation photos would go back to being stored in actual albums rather than serving as content. Privacy would make a comeback. That strange phenomenon where strangers know your political views, relationship status, and favorite pizza topping would end. You could have opinions without broadcasting them, make mistakes without them being permanent, and change your mind without it being documented. Fame would be redefined. Viral sensations would disappear as quickly as they appeared. Celebrities would have to be famous for actual achievements rather than follower counts. The Kardashian model of fame, being famous for being famous, would collapse entirely. But here's the interesting part. Without the constant external validation of likes and comments, people might finally develop a stronger sense of self. That shaky, approval-seeking version of you that checks notifications compulsively. It might grow into someone more secure, more authentic. Of course, the transition wouldn't be smooth. Many would experience what psychologists call identity dissolution, that unsettling feeling when the persona you've constructed no longer has an outlet. Some might flounder, others might rebel, but eventually, we'd all have to confront a fundamental question. Who are you when no one is watching? Stay tuned as we explore how this raw, unfiltered version of humanity would reshape something even bigger: our global culture. Let's examine the global ripple effects of a social media blackout. The geopolitical landscape would shift in ways both predictable and astonishing. First, consider how revolutions have been organized in recent years. From Arab Spring to Hong Kong protests, Social media served as both megaphone and organizational tool. Without it, grassroots movements would need to rediscover old-school resistance tactics. Underground newspapers might make a comeback. Protesters would have to memorize meeting points instead of checking event pages. Governments would find it easier to control narratives, but also harder to monitor dissent. International relations would enter uncharted territory. That time a rogue tweet nearly started a war. No longer an issue. Diplomats could return to the art of subtle messaging through proper channels instead of public callouts. The concept of Twitter diplomacy would join the history books alongside carrier pigeons and telegraph wires. Global commerce would face interesting challenges. Small businesses that relied on Instagram to reach international customers would need to adapt. The handmade jewelry market in Bali might collapse while local tourism booms as travelers actually discover places organically again. The phrase, going viral, would revert to its original, much more concerning medical meaning. Cultural exchange would slow but deepen. K-pop's global domination might stall without YouTube and TikTok algorithms pushing it worldwide. But the fans who remained would be the truly dedicated ones. Anime conventions would become more exclusive, and possibly more intense, without casual viewers diluting the fandom. Language barriers would become more pronounced. Without instant translation features and global comment sections, people would have to work harder to connect across cultures. But those connections that did form would be more meaningful. Pen pal programs might see a resurgence among those craving international connection. News consumption would undergo its biggest transformation since the printing press. The 24-hour news cycle would slow to something resembling sanity. Misinformation would still exist, but without algorithmic amplification, it would spread at human speed rather than viral speed. People might actually read full articles instead of just headlines shared by their uncle. Perhaps most significantly, we'd lose that peculiar modern phenomenon where everyone feels simultaneously connected yet isolated. The illusion of global village would fade, replaced by a more honest understanding of our place in the world. Neither as insignificant as social media sometimes makes us feel, nor as centrally important as our personal feeds suggest. The world would become both larger and smaller, more fragmented yet more authentic. Stay tuned for our final chapter where we imagine what might emerge from this social media cleanse, for better or worse. As we wrap up this thought experiment, let's imagine the world a year after social media's disappearance. What would it look like? Would we revert to some nostalgic version of the past, or would we forge something entirely new? The first thing you'd notice is the silence. Not literal silence, but the absence of that constant hum of digital chatter. No more endless notifications, no more trending hashtags, no more viral challenges. The world would feel slower, quieter, and perhaps a bit lonelier, at least at first. But in that silence, something remarkable would emerge: creativity. Without the constant distraction of social media, people would have more time to think, create, and explore. Artists might produce more meaningful work, writers might pen deeper stories, and musicians might compose richer melodies. The pressure to create content for likes would be replaced by the freedom to create for the sake of creation. Communities would become stronger. Without the illusion of connection through screens, people would invest more in their local neighborhoods, workplaces, and social circles. Relationships would deepen as we learn to communicate face to face again. The phrase, "it takes a village," would regain its meaning as people rediscovered the value of genuine human connection. Mental health would improve. The constant comparison to others' highlight reels would fade, allowing people to focus on their own lives and well-being. Anxiety and depression rates might drop as we learn to live in the moment rather than constantly seeking validation from others. The way we consume information would change. News would become more reliable as people turned to trusted sources rather than viral posts. Misinformation would still exist, but it would spread more slowly, giving truth a fighting chance. People might even start reading books again, actual books, not just summaries on social media. But perhaps the most significant change would be in how we see ourselves. Without the pressure to present a perfect image online, people might finally embrace their flaws and imperfections. Self-esteem would rise as we learn to value ourselves for who we are, not for how many followers we have. So, what would the world look like without social media? It would be a world where we focus more on what truly matters: our relationships, our passions, and our well-being. It would be a world where we create for the joy of creation, connect for the sake of connection, and live for the beauty of life itself. If you enjoyed this journey into the What If, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to What If Horizons for more mind-bending explorations of the impossible. Let's keep imagining together.